And he'll then go on to mention a Danish philosopher by the name of Kierkegaard. I could talk about him at length, but he's a theologian who distinguished himself in a number of ways, but his basic contention is that we live in an impossibly conformist society where both new mathematical and new scientific methods are making it incredibly easy to predict the behavior of populations and individuals. There's also German philosophy is making its way across the continent, and they're arguing that all of history is transpiring in a determined fashion, so that human freedom, as a matter of fact, is a mere illusion. We can prove to you either theoretically, statistically, or behavioristically exactly what you're going to do. And what Kierkegaard is going to want then to celebrate is those outrageous actions which are so inconceivable, so improbable, so outrageous that nobody could have ever predicted them. The most famous in Kierkegaard's life, I mean, he's this starving and kind of funny-looking theology student. Nobody's excited to take them home to mom and dad. And he somehow gets engaged, the most eligible young woman, the most desirable young woman in Copenhagen, and shortly before the day of their wedding, he dumps her cold. And when people ask him, well, what the hell were you thinking? It's the sheer absurdity of the action which he performs precisely in order to suggest that freedom is still an option in this seemingly deterministic world of ours. So he'll write about that a little bit, but then he's also going to talk about God being the theologian that he is, in order to make his argument for what freedom might look like. He uses a story from the Bible. In this case, it's the story of Abraham and Isaac, and you know that Abraham is asked to take his son, for whom he has prayed for 70 years, out, and against all intellectual and moral, he's asked by God to go kill his son. Abraham famously, or legendarily, says, okay, here I go. And he takes the kid out to sacrifice his son in response to God's completely inscrutable call, but God's absolutely insistent call that Abraham is seen to have demonstrated total faith. And then, of course, the angel stays his hand. But what Steinberg finds so interesting about Abraham is his willingness to have faith in the absurd and the inexplicable. It seems that new art confronts us with the same kind of inexplicable but absolute demand, and it's our job to respond to it in one form or another, even when it looks to be a bad risk. Now, why does he bring up this notion of bad risk? It's because in the 1950s, and especially in the early 1960s, this is the first time that people are actually beginning to see art as a financial investment. Not that people didn't pay a lot of money for art prior to this, but when you go on the news and see that somebody just spent, $75 million for that, it looks like somebody threw a mud ball at a canvas, or like they, put their dog's feet in a paint bucket and let it run wild. You're paying $70, $80, $90 million for this is insane. But the reason people are beginning to do this in the 1960s, they're not just investing in famous traditional pieces which are known to be of enduring worth, but they're speculating on new artworks, betting the way you would bet in the stock market on a painting's acquiring value over the course of 10 or 20 years. They don't like this. They don't care about modern art. They don't care about. All they want to do is invest in oil painting the way that they might invest in oil petroleum. It's just speculation. They're playing the art market like the stock market, and they're creating what we're still living in right now, which is an absolutely unrealistic bubble, which one day is going to burst. So a lot of these people who are shelling out money now, they're going to be sorry that they did. But Steinberg's point is this is not what art is all about anyway. Art isn't who can make the biggest killing in the stock market. Art is about what kind of challenges keep us intellectually and culturally vigorous, that they keep us on our toes, that they keep us awake. And so the bad risk isn't, how much money are you going to put up on the auction block or give to the auctioneer, but it's the amount of time and the amount of commitment that you're willing to make to argue in defense of the indefensible. This is what he means by a bad risk, and yet this is exactly what we need to do if we want to stay modern and if we want to stay free. Then from there, he turned to another Bible story, and I think this one's really interesting. It's the story of manna in the wilderness. Now, if you went to Sunday school growing up, awesome, you know this story. If you didn't, well, now you know. Now you will know. This is after the Israelites are let go, released from slavery by the Egyptian Pharaoh. They go off and wander around in the wilderness. And this wilderness analogy that Steinberg is going to make is significant, because I just told you, this is how he sees artists who are learning to create new things by going without. You have to bring precious few supplies, only what's barely necessary to keep you going, and yet somehow hope to make it across to the promised land. And in the case of the Israelites, they have to wander around the desert for 40 years before God's going to let them walk into the promised land. Well, why do they have to walk around for 40 years? That's a term that actually comes up in the text earlier. Philistines is a term that we now use for people who like bad art, who don't know the difference between quality and inferior art. Well, why do we call them Philistines? Because Philistines, if you read the Hebrew Bible, worshipped idols. They bowed down before the wrong thing. And when the Israelites are walking around in the desert and Moses goes up on the mountain to get the 10 Commandments, what do they immediately do? They turn to worshiping idols. Why? Because they've been living in Egypt for generations. They don't know any other way. God has to reveal himself to them as the one true God. But, they were bowing down to the golden calf, as is to be expected. But in order to show them just how absolutely wrong this is, they've broken the first 2 commandments. And so the entire generation of people that defiled themselves by worshiping the golden calf, they now have to be eliminated. So they're going to walk around the desert for an entire generation, 40 years, until all these people pass away, and then their children can inherit the promised land. But all right, walking around in the middle of the desert, what the heck are they going to eat? And so God, he provides a little cake, little kind of bread that shows up every morning on the ground. And this is called manna. He's created it so that they can wake up in the morning and go collect it. But one of the safety devices God builds into manna is that once you've collected enough for yourself and brought it home, by the end of the day it goes rotten. And so there's no point in trying to collect more than you need and possibly even selling it to other people at a profit, because it simply doesn't keep. And so it's perfectly futile to try to stockpile manna and get rich off it. Nevertheless, it is something that we need to collect every day. And then to kind of seal off the story, the name for manna, what did it taste like? You know, God's making bread. Was it good? Was it bad? And the interesting thing is, we don't know what manna tasted like, because the term for manna, and the technical term for this is hapax legomenon. When we want to know what words in a dead language mean, the way to do that is find all the various places in which the word is used, and then we can extrapolate from all those different usages what this word must mean. So that's great if the word's used a lot of times, but if the word's used only once, you've got nothing to compare it to contextually. There's just that one use, and so you can't really read it. And this is the case with manna. The flavor of manna only appears one time in the entire extant record, and hence a legend arises that manna didn't have any particular taste, but it tasted to each person the way that they thought it would taste. It tasted to them the way they wanted it to taste. If they wanted it to taste like tow and paraffin, that's exactly what it would taste to them. If they wanted it to taste like milk and wild honey, then that's the taste that it would have. And so you have to collect it every day. It's what you need to stay alive, but whether you enjoy it, what you get out of it, whether it makes for a life worth living or a life of tedium and constant frustration, that's your choice. Now, the very last thing that I'll say, and then I'm going to close this video down, is for those of you who actually did read the Marcel Mauss, his name gets mentioned nowhere in this text, and yet I'm using him to talk about sacrifice, to talk about functionalism and the switching of role. Did Steinberg read Mauss, or did he not? And I can never know, but the one thing that convinces me he did is not simply the ideas that are contained in this, but what's the key word that Mauss uses when he wants to talk about the magic worldview and everything is simply happening spontaneously. The term that he uses for that is manna. And what is the word that he ends the essay with? Manna. Now, it's spelled two different ways, but that homonym, that acoustic resemblance, that's got to be. I don't even know if it's on purpose. It probably came to him like magic comes to you in an instant. I don't know, but it had to be. It's as if this story had meant to find its way into this discussion of the modern New York art world. The same type of collective forces which prompt our responses, which trigger our reactions to the new work of art. That's the same thing that was going on in the most archaic societies. We don't behave any different than them. The objects which mystify us, the objects which cause us to behave in ways which are beyond our individual control, those objects have changed, and they always will change. But the basic social phenomenon of being triggered and caused to function in one way as opposed to another, that's what it means to be human. And Steinberg, I think, does a great job of showing how that's the case with modern art. So I'm talked out now. I'm going to shut this on down and start editing. Hope you enjoy this video, and I hope that you will enjoy our new readings when I post them. All right, have a great weekend. Bye. Mm-hmm.